Blackness, silence, 1,000 dark, twisted dreams soared through my mind, tortured souls, miserable events, and an overbearing dread which colored the timeless sleep which I found myself in. I seemed to be a visitor, a passerby in these visions, more than visions, really. They were just inferred realities. It was as if I could not comprehend their true content and still live. In the midst of this experience, I suddenly became aware of myself, and in a moment was catapulted into consciousness. My eyes shot open, staring up at a wooden beam ceiling. The faint sound of a bedside fan hummed into my ear, wisping cool air past my face. Against the wall sat my luggage, still packed. On the wall, a simple analog clock read 11 a.m. The comforter I laid under was warm, homely. I could faintly smell toasted bread. Did that really happen? I asked myself, bringing my hands to my face and wiping the sleep from my eyes. Was the man in the apartment real? Was the attack in the rectory? Was it all some hellish nightmare? I sat up, feeling uncharacteristically refreshed, and took my bearings. The room was large, furnished in the same Victorian adjacent, almost neo-Gothic style as the rest of the house. I was wearing the t-shirt and gym shorts which I had on under my cassock the previous night. On the baseboard, my black socks and cassock were folded over neatly. I threw off the comforter and put my feet on the floor. Cool, storied hardwood greeted me. My strength, which seemed to have abandoned me in the midst of my horror the night before, had returned in full. I exited the room, finding myself on the upstairs floor of the rectory. Beside me was a short hallway with a handful of other rooms, including one with a hanging wooden plaque plainly marked Kelly. I looked on the other side of my door. Gray. Across from my door was a staircase, which led me down to the same hallway as CK's office. I wasn't sure what else was on the first floor, save for a dining room and kitchen beside the spacious living room I had been in yesterday. Despite its impressive structure from the outside, the rectory was modest, not small, but compact. So far I had seen 2 floors, each of which had only a handful of rooms connected by a short hallway. I walked down toward the kitchen where I could hear and smell the cacophony of cooking. CK had his back to me as I rounded the archway, stirring something into a frying pan. My stomach suddenly rumbled as the scent of breakfast filled the air. Bacon, eggs, toast. Ah, Gray, CK happily said without missing a beat. Glad to see you've joined me here in the land of the living. He turned his head for just a moment, revealing a smile laden with friendly sarcasm before going back to his cooking. I sat down at the table, dishes already laid out for our meal. I suppose you're gonna want some explanation about last night, he began. But if we get into it without some breakfast, you might just pass out on me again. He clicked off the burner, grabbing the pan and walking over to me. I hope you like your eggs scrambled and your bacon crispy. He laughed, scooping a hefty amount of both onto my plate. Not much of a cook, but I can do the basics well enough. He did the same to his plate before grabbing 2 pieces of toast, one for each of us, and sitting down across from me at the table. I expected some long-winded blessing, perhaps in Latin given his own inclinations, but his idea of saying grace was quite abrupt. A quick sign of the cross over our table, and a short prayer. God, thank you for giving us food. Bless the workers who brought it to us. Bless all those that we, being sustained by it, will encounter today. Amen. So we ate. Despite my own inner confusion, I found myself absolutely devouring what was in front of me. I was ravenously hungry, as if I hadn't eaten in days. At a certain point, I realized that I had gotten through my entire plate while CK wasn't even partly finished with his. I sheepishly looked up from the table, encountering his bright smile. I suppose you'd like to know what made you so famished? Ha, I chuckled, still caught off guard at his candor. Well, I began, I'm still trying to figure out exactly what really happened. It seems like I dunno. It exists in a fogged memory. It's like a dream. He interrupted. Exactly, like a dream, or a nightmare. Many would say the latter, kid. Suffice to say, it wasn't either, not properly speaking. At least, I paused, letting the weight of this truth impact me. It was all real, kid. From the moment you left this rectory to the moment you fell to the ground cry. So, I tried to gather my thoughts. The apartment, the man, well, CK began. I only had a report to go on, but unless you encountered some insane coincidence, I'd say it was real as well. I felt relief, but behind that a sense of frustration, possibly even anger. How had Kelly allowed me, with no experience, to walk into such a situation? Why had he not come with me? And how had that entity followed me back? I must have been visibly stressed, as CK's next words were laden with comfort. You didn't do anything wrong. My eyes met his. He had a look of genuine concern on his face. You did exactly what I told you to do. and got a result which will expedite this whole thing. What was it? I asked, exasperation clinging to my words. Kelly thought for a moment. It was a legion, which is what the report indicated. He sat his silverware down on the plate, leaning back and setting his hands in his lap, contemplating his explanation. A week or so ago, the bishop received a report from St. Jiaorong Parish. Father Liang had a parishioner exhibiting some classic signs of possession, and a family on the brink. They did a psych eval, of course, but he was mostly unresponsive. Something about the signs, though. He trailed off for a moment. There are different types of possession, kid. I'm sure you know this. We covered it. Oppression, obsession, and possession, right? Well, not exactly. Those are 3 manifestations of demonic activity. I'm talking about the third, the different types of possession itself. I drew a blank, and CK could tell. There's the more classical case. Individual possession, one demon which infests one's soul, impacting the world around it and trying to bring about as much chaos as possible. There's even objectual possession, infestation, when the demon somehow takes hold in a physical object and lashes out from there. But in all these cases, you're still dealing with a single spirit, one obnoxious twat trying to tear down the world around it. I chuckled, appreciating the effortless humor he laced into his conversation. While there are different subtypes, this was not a case of individual possession. This was a legion, a multiple possession, multiple demons infesting the same person, using their combined efforts to bring about as much destruction as they collectively can. The family, I said, suddenly putting things together. They're not after the guy. They're trying to wear down his family. Exactly. CK continued, leaning forward in his chair, his hoarse voice taking on a palpable seriousness. A legion isn't out to possess one individual for the hell of it. They're out to cause mayhem to as many people as possible. In this case, to tear down the physical and mental well-being of this family, drive them to the brink, destroy their faith, and, if they can, lead them to death. I contemplated his words, letting the weight settle on me. So, I asked, what followed me back? CK laughed, a hearty chuckle from deep down. Oh, that. He straightened up again. That was what I was counting on by sending you. You see, if I had gone in there, it would have been an obnoxious game of cat and mouse. They would have picked up on my identity in a heartbeat and laid low, trying everything in their power to make this case seem like a tragedy of natural circumstances. I needed to be sure this was a legion. Unfortunately, they know me too well, but they knew my name. Oh, that's what they wanted you to believe, he said with an almost scoff. Great tricksters. These things, they didn't know you from Adam until you entered that room and let your guard down. One of the things we'll have to work on is fortitude, but that's always the case in new exorcists. Demons can't just steal everything out of your head. They're not magicians, but they can pick up on big picture realities, including your identity. And what's the easiest way to freak somebody out? He paused for a moment, letting the air hang with anticipation before sticking his hands up, clawing in a cartoonish monster impression. Greyyyyy. Greyyyyy. He laughed, slapping his thigh. I was dumbstruck, to say the least. Kid, he continued, it's all about optics and fear. You got followed home because one of the Legion decided you might be an easy target for individual possession. Apparently, that indelible mark on your soul from ordination wasn't enough to keep it away. Or maybe it was too dumb to notice. You do get that sometimes demons can be as stupid as a box of rocks when they're self-absorbed and conniving. So it followed you home and decided to start with the oppression, and you put a stop to it. Well, I was waiting in the church for your arrival, saying my prayers. You know, priest things. He smiled, but when I felt it, that indescribable sense which you will attune over time, I knew. So I came back over, just in time, apparently. I stared down at my plate for a moment, contemplating everything he had explained. So, I began, is it gone? Did you take care of it? Oh, yes. No problem there. It was a nobody. Sent him packing with a few minor exorcism prayers and some. He chuckled. Harsh language. I laughed, finally feeling some levity in my heart. What do we do now? Well, considering you've been asleep for 3 days. 3 days. I jumped out of my chair. Shocked, CK started cackling again, and I realized I'd been had. Oh, kid. I'm messing with you. You had a single night's rest. I stuck you upstairs, folded up your cassock, and said a few minor exorcisms over you just in case. You're fine. Hopefully we can't say the same for that Legion we'll be taking care of this afternoon. I sat back down, laughing myself. It's going to take me some time to get used to your humor. CK. Time we've got, but not much of it. Daily mass is in half an hour. I'll celebrate, go get dressed and sit in the congregation. You ought to get to know the people who will be calling you Padre. We got up with little fanfare. CK washing dishes as I started my own morning routine. Mass went on with little fanfare. Although highly attended for noon on a Friday, the church itself was beautiful. With arches and features exemplifying the time period of its construction, the jewel of the sanctuary was a large marble high altar, with a beautiful reredos covered in statuary, like most things relating to CK. His Mass was old school as well, all in Latin. Except for the readings, celebrated with no obnoxious alterations or personal liberties. Throughout the liturgy there was an air of real reverence on his part. He seemed to disappear into the right, as C.S. Lewis would have put it, and his signature attitude was hardly noticeable except for a few moments of humor in his preaching. I was able to compliment the altar boys on their skill at serving the Mass and speak with a few families, all of which were thrilled to see me. There seemed to be a high regard for CK, to the point that almost everyone had something similar to say. I owe Father Kelly so much, said Brandon, a 20-something with his wife and 3 children tagging beside him. Father Kelly changed my life. Truly changed it, beamed Allison, attending Mass with her newborn while her husband watched the rest of the family at home. I wouldn't be here today if it weren't for that man, explained Razi, a middle-aged Palestinian immigrant. CK caught up with me afterward, having put away his vestments. Feeling up to the task again, he said with a smirk, I take it we have some unfinished business. CK, hey, unfinished business. I like that, good trope. He gave me a light elbow to the side, walking towards the door. Say some personal prayers if you like. We're heading right over. Doctor gets there at 2 o'clock. The next hour seemed to fly by. CK and I, already wearing our cassocks, packed white surplices and ornate violet stoles into our briefcases. Each of us brought our copy of the ritual, although CK assured me he would be the one doing the exorcism itself. Then we hit the road, CK in the driver's seat, ready to make our appointment. As we drove up to the imposing apartment complex, I could see the same family waiting on the stoop, though not bothering with the veneer of normalcy which they had tried to give off the day before. They looked properly disheveled, exhausted, and pitiful. As CK parked, I felt my stomach go hollow again, a tinge of fear overcoming me. He seemed to sense this, looking over at me with almost fatherly affection. He placed his hand on my shoulder. In the world you have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. He gave me a firm pat and reached over to open his door, exiting the car and walking over to the family. I followed, somehow imbued with a new confidence. From behind me I heard a nasally, grating voice. So, yous must be the priests I'm working with. I turned around. Walking towards me was a short, portly middle-aged man. He had on a white polo and khaki Bermuda shorts, and seemed on the cusp of being out of breath. Ah, I said, you must be Dr. Mangrove, he answered, sticking out a sweaty hand for me to shake. Harold Mangrove, do work at the university across town. We broke our handshake and I glanced back at CK, who seemed to be actually engaging the family in conversation. I never done nothing like this before, Harold said. I mean, this possession stuff. I ain't exactly a believer. You know, in what? I replied. In anything, really. Well, I'm still not sure what I believe about all this, so hopefully that puts you in good company. He seemed startled by my statement as I walked over to CK. Doctor's here, I told him. Should we start? Oh, yes, CK replied, breaking away from his own conversation. The sooner the better. We walked back to the car, putting on our vestments and grabbing our books. CK carried a bottle of holy water in one hand, his bookmarked ritual in the other. Out of the corner of my eye I could see Harold looking on with a smirk at the show. Finally, after checking that Harold had all of his supplies, we walked back to the stoop and were brought up to the apartment by the same brothers who had led me yesterday. As we ascended each story I could feel my heart begin to beat faster. I became increasingly aware of all my surroundings. Behind me I could hear Harold gasping for breath. We entered the apartment complex and walked straight to the padlocked door. As we approached, CK suddenly stopped me. The doctor needs to go first, he said. We can't proceed unless the patient is stable. Harold cut past us both, still catching his breath as he pulled a few supplies out of his own bag. Father imparted a blessing out of habit, the two brothers signing themselves before the older took out his key. I seemed to vicariously relive my own experience watching Harold's reaction to the open door. He was less than tactful, however, immediately gagging and coughing as he meandered into the room. We stayed out of sight, the two brothers standing guard at the doorway with faces of stone. Ah, came the same serpentine voice as yesterday. Doctor, CK and I looked at each other, and he gave a short tap on his temple. Fortitude, I thought to myself. Maintain fortitude. From inside the room we could hear Harold's observations. Blood pressure, heart rate, temperature. He rattled off numbers under his breath. Can you hear me, buddy? He must have been speaking to the patient. My name is Dr. Mangrove. I'm here to help. Can you hear me? Silence. How are you feeling? Silence. After a few moments, Harold walked out. He was drenched in sweat, pale and looking like half the man he was before. He's been through the shit, he said. But he ain't unstable. Not yet. We ain't leaving here with him chained up, though. I understand different folk got different responses to crazies. But you's gotta understand this guy needs to be taken somewhere when you're done. Non-negotiable. You can say your prayers and blessings. But anything changes and I'm calling it. CK nodded and turned to me, beckoning me to go first. I nervously followed his lead. The atmosphere of the room was just as bad as the previous day, if not worse. The stink of rot, the sting of ammonia. My adrenaline shot through the roof as soon as I saw the man lying in the bed. The fear was not as present. At least not so that it burned my muscles, but the adrenaline coursing through my veins was entirely uncontrollable. Once again my unconscious mind was face to face with the inhuman. Immediately, a twisted smile came over his face and that hellish chorus began to scream my name. Another chorus of wicked cackling and screams overlaid on it. Gray, GR. CK entered the doorway. Coming into view, he walked past me with extraordinary command, a look of righteous zeal on his face. In an instant the cries of the man ceased, replaced with a look of terror and shock. Silence, creature, CK bellowed, sprinkling holy water across the room. Any discernible words were replaced by insane, damned screams of torment. A chorus of hundreds, if not thousands. CK sprinkled himself with holy water, followed by me. We opened our rituals. The following minutes were a blur. I made the liturgical responses as CK powerfully commanded the demon to depart, his perfect Latin accentuated with an accent of divine pleading. My own was rusty, but still confident. Et clamor mus ad te veniat. Et cum spiritu tuo, sed libera nasa malo. Amen. The creature on the bed writhed in agony, pulling at the chains which bound it. My mind could not even conceive of this being a man any longer. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see Harold standing transfixed. The room itself began to grow cold, deadly cold. The lights, previously bright and stark, became dimmed as if viewed through a dark glass. Just like last night, it seemed as if every shadow, every hidden area was crawling with hellish monsters. I felt watched from every side. Vade, CK cried, raising his crucifix into the air. Vade retro satana. The room was consumed in a chorus of screaming, Inkai blackness overcoming all shred of light. CK continued even in the midst of the darkness, his memory serving him. I could sense the entities present with us, like one might sense eyes in the back of their head. Untold numbers of monstrous beasts encircled us and waited for an opportunity to strike. They expressed pure, absolute hatred. There was no doubt or second thought in their minds. They hated us and wanted us dead with every fiber of their being. I remembered CK's word, fortitude. I tried with all my might to hold on to my sanity. If nothing else, a juroti, serpens antique. Suddenly, light. It was as if I had suddenly come into being then and there, surrounded by the stark and bright light of the beginning of the universe. It was almost overwhelming until my eyes came into focus. CK stood over the man, his hand extended. His ritual had wound up on the floor at some point. Harold was sitting on the ground, appearing to be in a state of shock. As I looked before me, all I could see was this poor man contorted in some unnatural way. His face writhed in agony, bound up between limbs, chains, and appendages. The chorus of screams, which I realized my mind had blocked out due to their constant drone, had grown to a level which made me cover my ears. CK remained, hand extended, calmly speaking the exorcism. It was a sight unlike anything I had ever seen. Suddenly, a great force like a gust of wind forced us backward. I fell onto the floor, and on the other side of the bed I could see the same thing had happened to CK. The chorus of screams slowly faded into one, which then became a single, sad whimper. CK quickly rushed to his feet and I followed. On the bed was the man, still chained and covered in sores and bruises, but crying in a confused, pitiable voice. CK looked at him, and a wave of relief seemed to come over him. I did the same. Nothing uncanny. I turned and beckoned the two brothers to come in, helping them to untie the chains which had kept the man secured to the bed. They all embraced in a hug, tears flowing across the room. CK picked up his ritual and wiped sweat off his brow. I approached him, feeling weak myself. A success? I asked. It seems, he weakly replied. But all successes necessitate thanksgiving. I'm going to finish the post-exorcism prayers myself. You take him." He gestured toward Harold, still sitting on the floor in a stupor. "And go let the family know. Wait for me outside." I got up Harold, still in a daze, and we walked back outside. The family burst into cries and tears of joy when I gave them the good news, delivered with a smile and a nod, a universal gesture. As they all ran inside, I took off my vestments, folding them and putting them back in my briefcase. I joined Harold on the stoop. Unfortunately, Harold's story ends here for the moment. He sat stupefied for some time, alternating between weeping and staring at nothing. Finally, he got up, waved a half-hearted goodbye, and walked back down the way he came. As I sat outside, looking up at the sunset and considering the events of the day, I had my own moment of thanksgiving. I heard the door open behind me and turned to see CK walking out. Disheveled but living, he made a beeline for the car. Still wearing his vestments, he quickly took them off and tossed them into the back, waving me over. "You drive," he said, tossing me the keys. It was the least I could do. The ride home was quiet. He seemed to be in a mix of exhaustion and meditation. When we finally got back to the rectory and walked through the front door, he seemed to have a moment of realization. "Oh, Gray," he exclaimed, "you have business to attend to." He walked into the living room and grabbed the phone off the wall. "What business? You haven't said your private mass today. And that's not negotiable in our field," he laughed. "One of the altar boys, Jude, is a couple houses down. One of the Hendersons. I think you met their dad today. Brandon." I recalled the meeting and nodded to CK. "Good folks," he said, dialing the phone. "I'll call Brandon and see if Jude can come serve your private mass today. In the future, we can work out a schedule." I sat my briefcase down and had a breather while CK made the call. All things considered, the rest of the evening went smoothly. Jude and Brandon knocked on the door a few minutes later and happily introduced themselves again. We walked across to the church where I celebrated my private mass, Jude excellently serving and Brandon observing from the back of the church with a look of fatherly pride. A half hour later, I said goodnight to both of them, tipping Jude $5 for the trouble, and made my way across to the rectory. It was dark and quiet. CK having apparently gone to bed, I made my own way upstairs into my bedroom, ready for a deep sleep. Then, sitting on my pillow, I saw a scribbled note. "Sunday, 2 p.m. Evaluation. See you in AMW. Details."